Truth Without a Guardian, by Wynn Ashwood. Chapter 2 The Pulse of the Palace. By mid-morning the palace breathed like a kill, steady draw in, hot breath out. The courtyards glittered, the limestone glare hammering at eyes and tempers alike. Shadows gathered themselves into narrow ribbons under colonnades, as if they too were servants made to stand in line. Meryt balanced a cedar tray on one palm, the kind inlaid with ebony lozenges that made her think of gaming boards, and stepped into the long east corridor, at the angle that kept her sandals quiet. On the tray, a polished copper mirror, a fan stitched with ostrich feathers, a small alabaster pot of unguent that claimed to be from Punt, and smelled like it had at least seen a map of Punt, and a folded scrap of papyrus inscribed with satire's crabbed, decisive hand. Fetch. Carry. Smile. Listen. The corridor's painted ceiling floated above her like a night that refused to fade, blue field, gold stars, every star a scribe's careful dot. Along the walls marched scenes of offering and conquest, Pharaoh smiting enemies with the same cheerful diligence satire used to prune her cuticles. Columns painted to mimic palm trunks held up the illusion of cool, their capitals splayed into painted fronds that never wilted. The cooler truth hid at ankle level, the stone here still remembered dawn. Servants moved in regulated streams, women bearing bread loaves stamped with the bakery seal, boys with water jars wet to the waist from their own splashing, a scribe weaving upstream, absorbed in a tablet, and wearing the smug tilt of a man who believes numbers place him above spilled beer. Meryt tucked herself into eddies and slipped past murmurs, catching the burrs of conversation the way linen catches thorns. Say the Queen will expand Amun's precinct again. Another decree. The priests of Khonsu already chew their tongues. Uther's chapels, half-starved, if you believe the gossips. Gossips were to be believed more often than they deserved, in Meryt's experience. People gave secrets away with their posture, with their breath, words came last. She clamped the tray tighter when a boy lurched with a bucket and wondered whether that unguent really had seen Punt, or merely a clever potter's kill downriver. If satire asked, it had come from the god's own dressing room. If satire didn't ask, Meryt might sell a whisper about the trader's name to the laundry mistress, who liked her news clean, but did not mind if it came wrinkled. At the corner where the east corridor met the hall of pillars, heat thickened as if someone had spilled soup into the air. Limestone drank sunlight and breathed it back, even the war gods seemed to glisten. Meryt tilted the tray to ease the pull on her shoulder, and slid into the columned forest. The hall of pillars always made her feel small in a useful way. Columns rose like stone reeds, fluted and fat, their bases circled by painted bands of marsh life, papyrus umbels, reed warblers, a fish forever half swallowed by a heron that had looked pleased about it for 50 years. The ceiling arched like the underside of a barge. Sounds changed here, muted, as though voices had to wade through carved stone before reaching ears. Two nobles had stationed themselves beside a relief where Hatshepsut offered mat to Amun, the feather of truth a careful triangle on the carved palm. Their linen was fresh enough to hurt feelings. Their collars flashed with faience and gold. The older one's belly pressed against his sash like a loaf rising too fast. They were doing that delicate thing men of rank did when they wanted privacy inside a public place. Not hiding, exactly, but arranging their bodies so that the current of traffic curved around them and the stray ear would have to work to collect their words. Meryt adjusted her route to brush, just close enough that a stumble would feel plausible. Not stumble. Never stumble. A servant who stumbled near important men made herself too noticeable. She paused to let a pair of women with jars pass, head slightly bowed, tray perfectly level. Her eyes, demure, studied the painted heron's eye. Her ears stretched like a cat toward the nobles bickering. A woman cannot be both king and priest, the older said softly, the softness a sign of real rancour. There are forms. Decent forms. The younger snorted. Forms bend when the state needs them. You said that yourself when the grain allotment doubled your stipend. Grain is not the gods. But grain keeps the gods fed in the temples. You forget the order of things. I remember the order very well. I also remember who carried me through the doorway of my own office and set me in the chair. Then you remember you owe that chair to her. And to a man, whose name she mouths whenever the sun looks her way. Meryt filed voices with faces. The older, Menkheper. Too plump for a soldier, fingers soft as bread. She had seen him once, eating honey cakes in the shade and flicking crumbs to a dog as if benevolence were a sport. Overseer of granaries, if whispers could be trusted. The younger, an estate keeper, by the look of his hands, a thin tether of callus where a whip had lived, his mouth too quick. Neither would know Meryt if she poured water down their sandals. Both would notice if she lingered like a fly with opinions. She moved on when their words thinned into throat clearing, catching only, Khonsu's men will not accept, before a passing porter's bundle muffled the rest. Khonsu again. The moon god's temple crouched, just beyond the great precinct, a quiet jackal at the elbow of mighty Amun. Lately its priests strutted like herons, convinced their reflection was another bird to be vanquished. You could tell who felt threatened by how loudly they preached. Then again, you could tell who felt safe by how loudly they laughed while counting coins. Meryt wanted to flick her gaze to the high windows where sunlight made a net over dust. Net. Thread. Fish. There she went again, turning the day into a loom while her stomach still had not seen bread. Past the hall, the air eased, as if even heat were ashamed to crowd into the accountant's corridor. Here, scribes nested on reed mats, their backs bossy with posture. Ostraca, shards of limestone and pottery, lay in small drifts, each scrawled with notes in quick, crabbed hieratic, delivered, delayed, damaged, 3 geese for Satire's supper plucked, 6 loaves to the North Barracks, burned, replaced, a complaint about beer too sour even for men who liked sour beer. The clack of pens against pots echoed like beetle legs. Ink smelled of soot and gum. Authority smelled like soot and gum too, which was fitting. Mind your shadow, a scribe muttered without looking up as Meryt's tray cast a dark trapezoid over his tablet. You are standing on my sum. Forgive me, she said, stepping aside. I would not wish to steal a number. Numbers were very sensitive, and would cry if you touched them, according to scribes. She had never seen a number cry, but she had seen a scribe sob when a jar of ink went over his clean copy, so perhaps the affection was mutual. A guard loitered near the doorway at the corridor's end. Not knacked. Jehuti, stocky, with a Horus amulet bumping against his chest, and eyes already searching for female mischief to distract his mourning. He saw Meryt and straightened as if he had been born a pillar. Meryt, he said, with the drawl of a man who had never met an errand he could not improve by obstructing it. Who is lucky enough to be the mirror's owner today? Lady Satire, she said, and enjoyed the way his shoulders sank half a finger's width. Satire frightened the flippancy out of certain men the way crocodiles frightened it out of bathers. Stand aside, Jehuti. The sun beats even on the heads of the idle. He grinned. I am never idle. I am decorative. He leaned close enough to sniff theatrically. Lotus. Or is that the new punt stink making you sweet? Devotion, she repeated from earlier, serene. It clings. She slid past him, letting the tray's edge lead like the prow of a ship. Beyond the doorway, the world opened. A broad sun court, where the queen's white limestone swallowed sky and returned it as glare. The far portico shimmered. Courtiers sifted across the flagstones, the men in pleated kilts that had taken slaves an hour to coax into knife edges, the women haloed by perfume cones that softened in the heat and wobbled perilously atop wigs. Satire had not yet joined them, praise to any god with a free hand, but her companions bobbed like well-bred ducks. The wife of a general with a leopard skin printed on her fan, the daughter of a vizier who wore her beads like proof of correctness. A pair of foreign envoys wrapped in linen too tight to stride. Official voices lapped the edges, stewards announcing who was where at what time, a herald practicing the drumming roll of titles, priests gliding like egrets with empty hands that promised to be full soon. Meryt overheard a fragment, the rhythmic, oily cadence of Parhemnetja's voice from across the court, and felt the hair at the nape of her neck lift as if a breeze had crawled out of the shadow and stroked her. She did not look for him. Snakes liked eye contact. She kept to the southern shade where a carved scene showed the queen raised by gods, a mun placing the ankh to her lips, Mut embracing her with a vulture wing. A worker on a ladder dabbed fresh paint onto the red skin of a divine elbow, the color glowed wetly, a wound that bled approval. Repair never ended in palaces any more than gossip did, both were always being refreshed. Girl, a sharp whisper hissed. A hand emerged from behind a screen of reed blinds, Henut, Satira's heavy-bodied attendant, cheeks damp and cross. Where have you buried your feet? The lady grows impatient. The fan was promised before the second water was poured. Meryt passed the fan into Henut's damp paw, and handed over the mirror, an unguent with the grace of a priest offering bread. Tell her I spared the mirror a scribe's shadow, and an accountant's sum, she said mildly. She will appreciate the purity. Henut snorted, which in her mouth meant thank you, and vanished. Meryt kept the folded papyrus, Satira's list of small tyrannies to be accomplished by noon, tucked under the tray. It bore, beneath the usual demands, pearl pins back, amber oil warmed, sandals restrung, a note that had not been there earlier, cramped in at the margin. Send word, who attends at Khonsu this afternoon. She admired how satire made curiosity look like housekeeping. If satire wanted a name, Meryt could probably find it by asking 3 questions of 2 people, and pretending she was bored. A cluster of men drifted close enough to splash Meryt with their talk. She studied the grain of her tray with deep scholarly interest. If she builds another shrine inside a Mun's precinct, the Moon Men will plot until their tongues dry. Plot? They already do. Menkheper says the temple granaries are lighter this month, missing baskets, he calls them, with receipts as perfect as dreams. Someone sells the gods wheat, and buys himself beer. Or buys favors. Beer is cheaper. They moved on, their laughter trying and failing to be careless. Meryt's mind rearranged the names on her internal board. Menkheper again. The overseer's belly pressed against his sash in the Hall of Pillars, and now his name floated here like a fly over honey. Missing baskets with perfect receipts, oh, that was the kind of perfection that made trouble. She pictured a rope looped over a beam, the creak of a pulley, a sack of grain swinging in torchlight. She pushed the image away. She collected threads. She did not tangle herself in them while standing under the Queen's sky. A boy in a priest's short kilt trotted past, with a woven tray of faience amulets, shaped like little wedjat eyes. He was red-cheeked with importance and the sun. One slipped, skittered, bounced twice on the stone and spun to a stop near Meryt's toes. She bent, caught it with her free hand. Blue flashed in her palm, the same water-deep glaze as the shard warming in her sash seam. She held the amulet out. The boy snatched it with a mumbled thanks and blurted, "We're late," to no one in particular, then sprinted on, the amulets chittering like beetles. Late for what? The small service satire had decided to be humbled at. The words on the papyrus twinged in her mind. Safekeeping of the Queen's house. Harmless as a blessing. Harmless like a cat, until you tried to take meat from under its paw. Move, girl. A steward brushed her hip with a writing board, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to prove he could have. His eyes flicked over her the way men's eyes did when they checked the alignment of a vase on a shelf, making sure it would not fall and break something they valued more. She moved. At the edge of the court stood a small knot of foreign sailors, bibelots, if Meryt judged the beards and the red-dyed wool fringe right, fidgeting while a translator tried to make their complaint political enough to deserve attention. Timbers, he said to a board official. Cedar warped the storehouse, his hands made the shape of a boat folding. The official made the expression of a man whose bowels had chosen a poor time to argue. He gestured with his reed pen toward the scribe's wing. Receipts, he intoned. Find them. Bring them. Wait. The foreign sailors subsided, muttering, their sunburnt feet shifting on hot stone. Meryt's sympathy rose and fell, rising because she had known that helpless shuffle, falling because everyone in this yard felt important, and some had to be wrong. She retreated a step into shade. From here, the palace looked like what it was, a machine, all its parts polished until they gleamed, each gear fitted to grind noise into order. Hatshepsut, Martker, given life, moved at its hidden center, the axle no one saw. The priests clung to the spokes and hissed whenever the wheel threw spray the wrong way. Servants greased the bearings and got their fingers caught. Enough poetizing, she scolded herself. Bread first, then treason. Her stomach agreed noisily. She glanced toward the servants' door at the court's edge, where a girl with ash on her cheek slipped out with a basket of yesterday's loaves, edges dry, middles still forgiving. If she timed it right, Meryt could intercept a crust and call it payment of a debt the cook had long forgotten. She also needed to find the laundry girl who served the Khonsu priests. The girl's ears were big enough to catch moonlight. Messenger. Henut's voice sliced back through the reed blinds. Meryt moved at once. One did not keep Henut's temper waiting. Satire sharpened knives on it. Henut thrust out a small folded slip. Take this to the boy from Khonsu. Tell him the lady is, she smirked. How such a plump face could smirk so sharply Meryt would never know, humbled. He must remember that word exactly. And tell him the lady will honor the service with her presence, unless the sun kills her first. He will write it down. Meryt took the slip, and, because no one looked at a servant long enough to learn from her expression, allowed herself the smallest twist of mouth. Humbled. Yes. Choke on it, Temple. I'll tell him, she said, and tucked the note under the tray's edge beside Satira's shopping list for power. She set off again, sliding back into the palace's flow. The day had fattened into itself. Heat rose from the stones in shimmering veils. Voices braided together, petitioners' pleas, officials' formulas, the susurration of fans, the clink of faience. Somewhere behind the porticos a drum carried the slow heartbeat of morning libations. She felt Nakt's name rise in her throat like a fish, and pushed it down hard. Not now. Not here, in the open court, with honor marching up and down wearing sandals. The boy from Khonsu stood near the arcade's mouth, his shaved scalp shining, his small jaw set in the way of children on adult errands. He had the look of a willow switch, thin, flexible, dangerous if swung by someone else's hand. Meryt reached him and tipped the tray, so that her body hid the exchange from bored eyes. For your priest, she said calmly. The Lady Satire is humbled. She let the word rest on her tongue a fraction longer than polite. She will attend the service for the safekeeping of the Queen's house. The boy blinked, surprised by a message delivered without contempt. Then, professional again, he fumbled a slate and a nub of chalk from his belt and scratched the words, as if they might wriggle away if he didn't nail them down. Humbled, he muttered. Attend. Safekeeping. He looked up. Does she bring gifts? Meryt's smile cooled. My lady is a gift, she said, with exactly Satira's brand of poison honey. The boy gulped, not sure if he'd been fed or stung, and ran off. Meryt turned back to the shade, the cedar tray still light in her hand, and lifted her chin, the better to catch the tinny carry of yet another conversation. A whisper, this one, thinner, two men half hidden behind a pillar painted with the sacred lily. One voice she knew at once, though she had heard it only rarely and never addressed to her, Parhamnetja, the priest of Khonsu, whose politeness felt like a knife wrapped in linen. "The moon sees everything the sun pretends not to," he murmured. "And yet the sun burns," his companion answered uneasily. "Only if you step out without a covering," Parhamnetja said, and his chuckle slithered. "We will make shade." Meryt pivoted on her heel, as if she had suddenly remembered a ladle, a sieve, a life. Her face smoothed itself, her eyes followed a bee. But inside, the blue shard at her waist felt heavier, as if it had become a real eye, watching. The palace breathed in, breathed out. A net of words stretched invisible from portico to portico. Meryt kept walking, the tray steady, her thoughts blooming with questions she would harvest later in darker corridors. For now, bread. For now, errands. For now, be small, be sharp, pretend not to hear the machine learning to sing. The eastern colonnade emptied into the Queen's Hall like a narrow stream feeding the Nile, quiet one moment, swallowed in the next by the flood of sound, color, and movement. Here, the palace's heartbeat was loudest, the steady tread of officials, the rustle of linen skirts, the snap of a fan catching air. Every step on the polished floor seemed to echo longer than it should, as if the walls themselves listened, storing words for later. Meryt walked the edge of the space, her tray now empty save for Satira's folded papyrus list. She had delivered the mirror and fan, survived Henut's glare, and skirted the conversations of nobles with more power than sense, yet the day was far from done. The sun had climbed high enough for the hall's roof apertures to pour straight shafts of gold onto the floor, dazzling white limestone between painted columns. The smell was a complicated blend, incense from the shrines, warmed beeswax from the polished floor tiles, and underneath it all the tang of many bodies enduring formal courtesy. She slowed near one of the smaller side corridors, letting her pace be swallowed by the press of people. The Queen was not yet on her throne. The heralds were still rehearsing the roll of her titles, drawing out vowels as though each was a coin dropped into a coffer. That meant there was a little time, a gap she could use. She had learned, long ago, that the palace's busyness was the perfect camouflage for listening. Two men passed close enough for their linen kilts to brush her sleeve. Their collars flashed with alternating beads of lapis and gold, expensive enough to advertise their nearness to power. Meryt ducked her head as they went by, her posture humble, her ears greedy. If Amun's priests continue to take the Queen's side, Khonsu's will have no choice but to act. Act? Or sulk, the second man replied, voice thick with mockery. They still sulk about her last decree. The moon cannot compete with the sun. The first gave a low chuckle. Perhaps not. But it can cover it. That's what eclipses are for. They moved on, their sandals tapping a rhythm that sounded to Meryt like the ticking of an unseen clock. She tucked away the words like a bead for a string, covering the sun. A warning. A boast. The priests of Khonsu had been restless for months, their rituals swelling with more incense and more venom. Parhamnetja's face rose in her mind, narrow-eyed, every polite syllable laced with something that did not belong in the open air. Keep moving, a steward barked, snapping her out of it. His expression didn't bother with suspicion. To him, she was just another piece of furniture that sometimes blocked a doorway. She shifted obediently into the flow, heading toward the far corner where a row of smaller side doors led into the service halls. On her way, she passed a knot of foreign envoys draped in fine wool, their beards oiled and braided with gold thread. A translator hovered between them and a scribe, his tone apologetic as he tried to explain the meaning of petition deferred. The foreigners gestured with the open-palmed incredulity of men used to quicker answers. Meryt caught only one word in their tongue, a name, repeated twice with emphasis. Not a name she knew, but one that might be worth knowing later. She reached the side corridor, and let the noise of the hall fade behind her. Here the ceilings were lower, the air cooler, the scent less perfumed. It was the back artery of the palace. Servants, guards, errand boys, and the occasional scribe with his sleeves rolled to the elbows. Meryt liked these halls. They didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were, the place where the real work got done. A group of kitchen boys hurried past, arms full of clay pitchers. One, a lanky youth with a mop of hair too long for his station, gave her a quick grin. She knew his type, the sort who could be persuaded to talk if you gave him the right mix of flattery and fear. But not now. Satira's list still lay folded on her tray, and she had no wish to be caught dawdling with kitchen gossip when the ladies' errands went unfinished. Halfway down the corridor, a pair of guards leaned against the wall in conversation. Jehuti was one of them, his Horus amulet glinting at his chest. The other was younger, a newcomer by the way his hands still fidgeted with the fit of his belt. "And I told her," Jehuti was saying, "that if she wanted the best wine, she should come to the north gate after sundown. And she did." The younger man laughed, shaking his head. "You'll get yourself posted to the desert with that mouth." "I'll get myself posted wherever I like," Jehuti replied, grinning. Meryt didn't slow. She had no need to. Jehuti never remembered who heard his boasts. But she filed away the mention of the north gate and the hour. Sometimes, knowing where someone wasn't supposed to be was as useful as knowing where they were. The corridor curved, leading to the small service court, where she could cut back toward Satira's apartments. The court was shaded by a row of sycamores, their leaves whispering over the murmur of water from a fountain. It was quieter here, though the quiet was not idle. It was the hum of people doing the 1,000 invisible tasks that made the palace function. Meryt paused at the fountain to dip her fingers in the cool water, letting the sound disguise her real intent. Across the court, two men in priest's linen were talking in low voices. Their wigs were oiled and scented, their sashes knotted with a precision that suggested they didn't do their own tying. "She won't last," one said. "Not without the gods' patience." "She has Amun," the other replied. "But Amun's patience is not Khonsu's." They fell silent as a pair of maidservants walked past, and when they resumed, their voices were too low to carry. Meryt withdrew her hand from the fountain and moved on, but the exchange stayed with her. Not without the gods' patience. And which gods were being counted in that sum? By the time she returned to Satira's quarters, Henut was in the doorway like an overfed hawk, arms folded. "You took your time," she said. Meryt lowered the tray, just enough to show the folded papyrus still safely there. The hall was crowded. "I took the long way back to avoid jostling the ladies' list." Henut grunted, clearly unsatisfied, but unwilling to contradict a practical excuse. She took the tray, her fingers lingering just a moment too long on the papyrus. Meryt knew that look. Henut had already read it, or would soon, and Satire would hear her version of whatever errands were listed there. Another web of whispers to keep track of. Inside, Satire was reclining on a couch, her kohl-lined eyes half-lidded. She didn't look at Meryt immediately, which was as much a dismissal as a command to stay. Only after a long moment did she speak. "Did you see the hall?" "Yes, my lady," Meryt replied. "And?" "The queen has not yet arrived. The nobles are restless. The priests of Khonsu were there." That made Satire's eyes sharpen a fraction. "Parhemnetja." "I did not see him," Meryt said carefully. "But some of his men." She did not mention the overheard words about eclipses or patience. Those were for her own ledger, not Satire's amusement. Satire waved a hand in dismissal. "Fetch fresh water for the perfumes. This heat will dull them before the queen hears her first petition." "Yes, my lady." Meryt bowed herself out, but her mind was still in the hall, with its braided conversations and hints of something more than ordinary rivalry. Khonsu's priests were moving in the open now, and people with too much rank to be careless were speaking of covering the sun. And Parhemnetja, somewhere in those halls, no doubt smiling his smooth, false smile. She would have to watch more carefully. And listen. Always listen. The water jars sweated like guilty men. Meryt hefted one from the service court, a clean coil of rope biting her palm, as she steadied the slosh. The sun had rounded to its pitiless height. Light pressed against the limestone like a hand on a drum, making everything vibrate. Flies, tempers, the faint metallic tang of sweat beneath perfume. She took the shaded way back, the corridor that ran behind the painted walls of the Queen's Hall, where murals of gods receiving offerings hid a more honest scene. Servants darting like fish through sluice gates, muscled backs glistening as they wrestled amphorae to and fro. Henut had demanded fresh water for the perfumes. Perfumes aged from divine to goat in heat like this. Of course, Satire would not smell of goat if she could help it. Goat was for people who didn't know how to place their eyebrows correctly. Meryt's feet found the rhythm that made jars behave. Step, sway, as if she were persuading the Nile to be kind. The clay mouth of the jar clicked softly against the rim of the shallow bronze basin she carried as a shield on the other hand. Every corridor held a different weather. This one was cooler, the flagstones still remembering dawn. The next would be a kill throat. The next a draught that tasted of old incense. She knew them by heart. The palace was a lover if you learned its moods and a punisher if you didn't. Much like certain guards she could name. Stop that, brain. The back passage opened into a narrow space behind a screen of reed blinds. A throat of shade separating the service hall from the Queen's Hall. Beyond the blinds, voices led into a complicated weave. The herald's chant rose and fell. Hatshepsut, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Martker, beloved of Amun, followed by the papery applause of fans. The petitions had begun. A steady percussion of formal grief, formal praise, formal complaints. Meryt eased the jar down onto a low stand to rest her hands, flexing fingers that had gone numb. She would pour, she told herself. She would deliver the water. She would not linger where sounds collected like gossip in a tavern corner. Two voices closer than the rest, separated by the blinds and a wall thick with paint and piety. Men positioned in the polite half-shadow that important men believed made them invisible. A scribe rustled nearby, scratching on a tablet, his pen a beetle-leg buzz. The shipment counted as promised, a smooth voice said. Oil poured over a knife. She felt the tiny prickle along her spine, before memory gave it a name. Parhemnetja. She didn't need sight to see him. Angular face, orderly wig, hands that liked to be empty in public so everyone could see how clean they were. The accounts will show fullness where there was lack. A second voice, softer, fat with comfort, Menkheper, if the gods were feeling generous in their clarity. You are sure your acolytes understand the numbers. They understand what is written for them to understand. A warm chuckle that did not reach bone. A sum can obey the truth you feed it. Meryt made her face blank, which was fortunately also how it looked when she was thinking so hard her forehead ached. Fullness where there was lack. Empty granaries that would look plump on papyrus. Missing baskets with perfect receipts. Menkheper's realm. Only a handful of people would notice. Scribes. Porters. Servants who lifted the sacks and found them light. Servants like her. People who were not meant to know how to weigh air. Besides, Parhemnetja went on, gentle as a cat moving a dead bird, the queen is generous. She believes in divine order. If we tell her the moon's favor keeps the stores from spoiling, she will smile. A small pause. We will keep them from spoiling. It is a matter of faith. And payments, Menkheper said, dry as stale bread. Faith demands offerings, Parhemnetja corrected, that smile audible again. Do you find the word distasteful? You are a pious man, overseer. Meryt could almost hear Menkheper's eyes blink. In the hall, the drum of petitions quickened, a petitioner's rash trembling under the skin of order. The smell of blue lotus drifted, the braid of its sweetness threaded with that animal pulse from the punt unguent. Satire would be a bright cold knife among the court women now, pretending humility in a way that made the word crack. Meryt reached for the jar. Deliver, she told her treacherous feet. Deliver and be dull as a brick. But the air stirred, the reed blinds moved, and the conversation dragged itself a handspan closer. Perhaps they shifted, perhaps her ears lengthened like a hare's. A small service is all, Parhemnetja murmured. A blessing for safekeeping. If the Queen's house is as secure as we say, what harm in asking the moon to guard what the sun cannot see? Menkheper clicked his tongue against his teeth. The sun's eyes are everywhere today. Then we shade our faces. We are not enemies of the sun. A velvet shrug. We remind it that night has work also. Enough, Meryt told herself. This was like pushing fingers into a cobra basket to count snakes. She lifted the jar, arms singing, and moved along the blind. There was a gap 2 strides ahead, where attendants slipped in and out with water, cloths, panicked messages. Through it, the corner of the Queen's dais would be visible, a sliver of the red granite throne like a tongue of fire. She wanted, how she wanted, to peek and see Hatshepsut's profile, the falcon crown, the carved straight line of a woman who had become a king. Focus, she commanded. Water. Perfume. Fans. Leave the king to her games. She rounded the gap, and walked into a wall of white linen and myrrh. Not a wall, Parhemnetja. He had stepped back from the blinds at the same moment, perhaps to re-enter the hall with his smile arranged. They nearly collided, and Meryt's jaw sloshed, a fat drop leaping to kiss the hem of his fine kilt. It left a darker petal there, like a bruise appearing on alabaster. She caught the jar's lip with both hands and bowed swiftly, the perfect angle of mortification. Forgive me, Holy One, she said to his feet. My eyes wander when I think of the Queen's titles. They are so many. His voice folded around her like cool cloth. And your hands? Do they wander also? My hands will find your throat, she thought, and despised how quickly her body supplied the image of his surprised mouth, the shock jolting through his careful posture. She kept her head lowered so he could enjoy his height. They are simple hands, Holy One. They carry water. They do not know how to wander. He let silence lengthen like a cat stretching. The scribe behind him pretended to become fascinated with the grain of his tablet. Menkheper's breath made a damp noise as if he feared stains. At last Parhemnetja said, mild as milk, you are Satira's girl. Not a question, their sort did not need to ask. I serve my lady Satire, yes. Then you serve the Queen, he said, still mild. Indirectly. As we all do. His sandals creaked as he shifted a fraction. She could feel his gaze on her headscarf, on the small scar above her brow, on the linen that hid her hair and the tucking of her sash where a blue shard warmed her hip. He would catalogue her the way scribes catalogued jars. You move quickly, he added. The court would run better if more servants did. We try, she said. We exhaust ourselves, she did not say, to make your steps look effortless. A stir passed through the hall beyond, those faint intake breaths people made when a notable petitioner approached the dais. Somewhere a herald cleared his throat into a scroll. Somewhere a woman laughed the exact width of a blade. Parhemnetja's tone softened further, as if they were friends sharing shade. And what does your lady smell like today, girl? Lotus. Or the new thing? Meryt kept her face down, grateful he could not see the quick roll her eyes attempted. She smells like devotion, Holy One. Devotion. He tasted the word, as Satire had earlier. Yes. It clings. An echo, which meant he liked to steal small phrases and hold them up like trophies. His voice dipped closer, confidential. The Queen's house is blessed when women like satire keep its forms. Forms matter. Then, almost as an afterthought, tell your lady that Khonsu's priests will pray for the Queen's safety this afternoon. We are humbled to serve. Humbled. The word brushed her like a cat's tail, soft, electric, faintly dirty. She folded herself into a lower bow, so he would not see her mouth's treacherous angle. I will tell her, Holy One. He lingered a heartbeat too long, enjoying the slight slope of her back. Then he stepped away. She heard the whisper of his linen, the thready sigh of Menkheper's relief. He moved through the gap with a murmur of greeting for someone more important. The scribe scuttled after, reeds clicking in his pot like insect wings. Meryt stayed bent until the vacuum of their passing filled with other people's noise. Her arms had begun to complain in earnest, the jar's shoulder dug into her palm. She straightened and breathed, a slow pull that cooled the heat that had climbed her throat. You didn't stab him with the jar. Congratulations. You are a model of patience. Your uncle would be proud. Or furious that you had the chance and didn't. She slid into the hall through the attendant's gap. Light slapped her cheek. The hot smell of bodies and incense layered like linen. On the dais, the Queen sat upright, the double crown balanced as if it had grown from the bones of her skull. Hatshepsut's profile had the composed cruelty of statues, no softness, even when her mouth curved faintly at some petitioner's cleverness. Nobles leaned forward like sunflowers. Priests arranged themselves into flocks. Satire stood behind the cluster of court women, taller than most, her wig's gold beads dim stars in the glare. She had arranged her face into the pleasant neutrality that said she could be cruel later, if someone needed the lesson. Meryt slipped along the perimeter, past a relief panel freshly burnished, among gifting ankhs like loaves to the Queen, until she reached the reed-screened alcove where Henut lurked with a bowl of rose water and the expression of a crocodile denied a small snack. You dripped, Henut hissed, staring at the damp bruise on Meryt's jar rim as if it were treason. I breathed, Meryt said pleasantly, and lowered the jar with a mute groan of wrists. The lady asked for water. The water came. The gods are merciful. Henut grunted. Satire will be called soon. The Queen will want the fan and the mirror again. Keep your feet ready. She thrust a bundle of fresh linen toward Meryt. For the perfumers. Hurry. Meryt took the linen, but her eyes, traitors, drifted to the dais. There at the edge of the Queen's attention, Parhemnetja stood, hands folded, expression like a bowl of milk, pure until you tipped it and found the bottom wrinkled. His gaze slid over the crowd and did not catch on her. He had no reason to notice a servant twice in one morning. He noticed most things twice. She would not flatter him by assuming she was among them. She let herself look once at the Queen, just long enough to fill the empty cup inside that sometimes ached for proof this woman existed not only in stone. Hatshepsut's eyes were cool as water held in shade. Power hung from her like a harper's instrument. The strings were there if she wished to pluck them, but her fingers rested. A petitioner finished. The herald's voice gathered itself again. Meryt turned away, and threaded back along the wall, past the carved lilies, into the less glorious corridor where the perfumers huddled like nervous birds over braziers and tiny jars. Here the air was thicker, humming with resin, myrrh, frankincense, Kaifi's dark wine scent, and the greener breath of lotus cones softening on shallow dishes. A boy fanned coals carefully, another ground galena in a small dish for coal, the powder black as a moonless river. A woman with quick wrists mixed unguent with a spatula carved into a duck. Meryt set the linen on a cedar chest. "For the lady Satire," she said, and the quick-wristed woman gave her a look that measured and approved at once. And Meryt added, keeping her tone easy, "I am to send word to the temple boy. The lady is humbled to attend the service for the queen's safekeeping." She let the word humbled fall with the weight of a fish onto a cutting board. The quick-wristed woman snorted softly. "Humbled like a cat on a cushion. The moon men will choke on that. Let us hope they cough so loudly the queen hears," murmured someone else, then pressed her lips together as if she had not spoken. Words were slippery here. They escaped even careful mouths. Meryt took in the room with her usual greed for details she had no right to. The tally quarts hanging on a peg, knotted for inventory, the way the perfumer's apron had a faint arc of brown where Kaifi splashed, the jar of honey with a crust of beeswax like a healed wound. Her mind collected it all and set it neatly on shelves. Once, a scribe had told her that memory was a temple shelf. You put the little gods where you could find them. She didn't worship her memories, but she fed them scraps. She pushed back into the corridor, moving against a trickle of servants carrying libation bowls. From the hall, a ripple of amusement. The queen must have favored someone with a smile small enough to startle them into joy. Meryt wondered, as she often did, what it would be to have her name called into that light. Dangerous fantasy. She preferred shadows. Shadows did not demand kneeling until your knees ached. Back at the reed blinds, the gap had filled with a different configuration of bodies. Menkheper waddled past, sweat frosting his upper lip, a steward in tow with a tablet and an obedient frown. The overseer's hands were clean of grain dust, his belt strained. He looked like a granary full of air. She moved aside to let him pass, and filed the metaphor. It would amuse her later, when the day's sharpness dulled, and she needed to feel petty to feel alive. She should go, deliver the message to the temple boy, collect the fan, be Satira's fingers. But the net around the hall tugged. From within, Parhemnetja's voice again, persuasive velvet. All loyal hearts in the Queen's house welcome the moon's blessing today. What is safe in sunlight is safer still under heaven's full gaze. Tidy, respectable, the kind of piety that made people nod because they liked words that sounded like cushions. Meryt's skin prickled as if a breeze had learned her name. She pictured ropes in rafters. She pictured a priest in a narrow stair, a coin changing hands, a crack in a ceiling spilling dust. She pictured Napt. No, she refused to picture him in a palace where people practiced smiling over traps. She pressed her tongue to the back of her teeth, until the ache folded into obedience. Henut hissed again. Now. The fan. Meryt went, because she was wise enough to be useful. She slid through bodies smelling of resin and ambition, and placed herself where she belonged, close enough to satire to pass a mirror in a heartbeat, far enough to be unremembered the moment she turned away. As she reached for the carved handle of the ostrich feather fan, her fingers brushed the seam of her sash. The blue shard, little eye, nudged against bone as if to say, look. Look longer than is safe. She would. But not here, not now, not with Parhemnetja's smile spilling like milk onto the stone and the queen's crown catching fire from above. There would be darker corridors later, and doors that didn't line up quite right, and a kitchen boy with ears like sails. There would be a service at Khonsu, and the moon painted in chalk, and hands raised to bless a house already knotted with intentions. Meryt lifted the fan, her face obediently blank, her inner voice bright and sharp as a newly honed knife. Humbled, she thought, and let the feathers stir air in a smooth arc. We'll see who swallows what.